Between the 23 and the 1 below it is a symbol apparently for 0, which reflects Bohemian time. Now the fixed middle circle represents the Earth, since that was 500 years ago what the universe centered around. And those other arcing lines represent the daylight and darkness. And the sun symbol and the moon symbol position themselves in that black area, which is nighttime, and into the blue, which is daytime, accordingly. Turk, ironically, with the mandolin, is supposed to represent hedonism. The Jewish moneylender, see the bag of money in his hand, is supposed to represent greed. And the figure staring in the mirror, of course, represents vanity. And the futility of all of these figures' endeavors is reflected by death. After the apostles have paraded, that rooster crows, and that begins the tolling of the bells, which are off sometimes because of daylight savings, which of course 500 years ago made no sense. This clever webbing is the support for the elevator. I decided to walk up the ramp, which is actually relatively easy to do. There, the teen church. There, the Hoos Memorial. Right below us, the 27 crosses. Top of St. Nicholas Church. Castle complex. There in the lower left, you can pick up in the middle left, you can see the towers. One in the middle, one in the center left on the Charles Bridge. There are the two towers. I suspect that is downtown Prague, at least the new town. It's a doorway inside the hall, town hall, and I assume it's original. And this is inlaid wood with, I think there's some inscribing on certain pieces. I assume what was called the Senate would have met in this room or behind that door. This looks like the scales of justice and the sword with which to met it out. seems negative. These are mosaics apparently done in 1904. The archways themselves are painted. This is the Powder Tower on Schletna Street. I think that is the Estates Theater. If it is the theater, this is the back of it. And this is a very pretty, whatever it is, incorporated into what now has the appearance of a new building. The other side of it. I don't know whether this is the Estates Theater, but there is a plaque to Mozart, who premiered his Don Giovanni here, which these words I'm seeing on this plaque. Perhaps the front, but I don't see any name that says Estates Theater. And I don't see it. Apparently this is the entrance, but you can't get in there unless you go to a performance, I guess. At least it's not open now. Best way to see this is look at the movie. Best way to see inside here anyway is to watch the movie Amadeus, which was actually filmed in this theater. Some of the same footage I took the first night I was here, but sun's out and it's much prettier, much warmer. People are out strolling about. It's a lovely evening. This is the restaurant I'm having dinner in my third night. Last night I stayed in my room and had bread and cheese and some fruit that I'd bought at the market. The camera just pan around slowly and show you what this looks like inside. And theoretically somewhere in here is a list of local patrons and their monthly beer tab. I haven't noticed that yet. The view outside. And when I'm done here, I'm going to go down to Carlo Most, which is Charles Bridge, and scope it out again. Okay, this is what I'm having for dinner. And if you can't read that, I'll read it for you. It has chicken breasts a la Novak, filled with mushrooms and with chicken livers. And it's 149 kron, which translates into about $7. Yeah, I forgot to add, the smart businesses have an English and a Czech menu. This one's particularly smart. It has one on one side and one on the other side of the menu. This is my dish for $7, and Rick Steves assures that it's traditional Polish or Czech cuisine, as does the waiter. Just noticed that across the street that building has, on the second story, the look of wood siding. But I don't really think it is. Could be. I don't think so. This interesting building is, I'm guessing, part of the National Theater complex. Very interesting building. Wonder what it's like inside and what's inside that part of it. This is the original theater, I believe. little bit different view than I had the other night of these statues. There's an interesting chunk of modern technical graffiti. In the 17th century, there were no statues on this bridge. All that was on the bridge was this cross. You'll notice a downward arc of Hebrew, and that is an inscription celebrating Jesus Christ that was put there by a Jew who had been fined for mocking the cross. This is a statue of John Nepomuc, who in the 14th century was a priest who was the confessor for the king's wife. Unfortunately, the king wanted to know what the wife said to the priest, and the priest refused to tell him. So the king had the priest thrown off this bridge. We'll go look at that exact spot in a few moments. It's not here. On the other hand, for me, it's simply different. There are two shiny spots. That's where people touched it because tradition has it. You will have good luck on your one wish. You only get one wish in life, so it's recommended you make that choice wisely. We'll try to touch both at the same time. Perhaps that gives you a little extra juice. Where that either the Nazis or the Catholic Church wired that up to some 220 power. I made that up. But this way it has an uncanny similarity to the crucifixion. This is a representation of the priest, the highest part of the shiny part, being tossed off the bridge, and notice his back is towards the water. And presumably this is his wife underneath the hand, being forced by that soldier to watch this strange execution. It doesn't seem that far to the water, but perhaps his swimming and diving skills were not what the Bible would have wished for. This statue was unveiled in 1683. It's the first or the oldest of the statues, and it was in a 300-year commemoration of the actual event. The 5 stars at the top depict 5 stars that theoretically were visible when he struck the water. He was thrown off the bridge somewhere in here, where there's supposed to be 5 stars, but they're not there any longer. So my guess is when they remodeled this part of the bridge recently, on one of these 2 stones that have been replaced, probably were those stars. This is the pan upriver from the bridge. Don't know what those buildings are, nor those. But all along the river are restaurants, wherever it's possible to put them, it seems. Very cosmopolitan city, at least in my terms. This tower, built by Charles IV, is considered to be one of the finest Gothic gates anywhere. The site for this tower gate was very specifically chosen. It lines up with the setting of the sun on the summer solstice and the sanctuary and the Vitus Cathedral up on the castle grounds. Seen from this point, some prurient tourists presumably think that the statue depicting on the public. Don't know what this curious building is. I think it may be some kind of a church, but it has that moon on the top that probably to the somewhat knowledgeable would give a clue. It also seems to have a system of bells in there. Now right next door is this restaurant Kabul, Afghanistan, it looks like, SPEC. So maybe there's a connection there. Just look at this building while I was wandering in the back streets on the way back, and then noticed how they had taken that same old, well, I'm not sure if it's old-fashioned or not, arch that was just curved at the top and put in a Gothic arch. And then I noticed the sign. Don't know what most of it says, but you recognize that part. It's the National Theater. People roaming around up on top of it right now. But also notice the other two elements that are modern added components. Interesting about it is if you notice that slot, horizontal slot in the lower right, where you enter there forces your mind to be flattened, if you will, in your expectation. And then when you walk in, there's that huge and curious courtyard. Again, focusing up on top of the buildings for the most interesting of the architecture. It was about 5:35 when I started walking up the river again this morning, hoping to get a slightly different perspective on it. There's a difference in coloring. Those rectangular deals there just covering up some sculpture that's being restored. I think this is such a pretty and elegant and practical way to accommodate trees, both the irregularity with which they grow and as they increase in size. Presumably if they got much larger, you just use different design with a wider aperture in the center. I videoed this the first day that I came. Still don't know what it is. Nice counterpoint, the old and ancient looking with the very modern. Shot this same scene last night, so we'll see if there's any difference. This morning I'm going to explore the Charles Bridge again and then a park that should be directly ahead of me, I think. And then I'm going to wander down this side looking at different sites, including the Lenin Wall if I can find it. And that's not Vladimir but John. And then take the funicular, which is, if it's like the one in Valparaiso in Chile, it'll be a cog-driven device that takes us up to the top of that patron hill, where the prime point of notice is this apparent replica, though it doesn't appear to be, of the Eiffel Tower. Here a classic shot, including the castle, St. Nicholas Cathedral off to the left, and part of the Charles Bridge. These glass door handles are old but interesting. Woodpecker, duck, a couple of fish, catfish. Well, the one thing we notice is the near absence of people, which is absolutely wonderful. Again, here we get a look at the innards. It'll be the last look for quite a few decades, because they're doing a completely thorough job rebuilding this bridge, stripping right down as far as they can go on one side, putting in a totally new steel infrastructure, and then building up to the surface, a surface that you see there that will probably be covered with sand and then covered with these cobblestones. Here is the point of reconstruction so far, absent with sand and absent the stones. Of course, that's what the stones look like when they come in on the pallet. This is the reconstructed wall, and apparently an earlier restoration used crummy stone, and so considerable effort and debate went into the selection of a quarry that had the highest quality stone, so that this repair would last for a long time. It's perhaps easy to ridicule a country for having done that, but on the other hand, when you figure all that this country's been through with the Nazis, the communists, it's amazing that anything's still standing. Here we can see a finished portion of the remodeled bridge, yet to be swept out and opened up to the public, as has the balance. Apparently this whole right side has already been done from here on. And many of these statues are not original but reproductions, apparently. The originals being in museums, although I have not seen any in a museum. But I haven't been to that many museums. The river, as perhaps she likes to be seen. Here are is the actual marking place, the 5 stars of the point where the priest was tossed off the bridge. Again, it doesn't seem that far down, but he was tortured beforehand, of course, so it was intended that he be in a state where he could not recover. Here, an unobstructed view. When we look closely at this panel, you can see that the priest, almost worn away from being rubbed, and then you can see that the soldier clearly, or at least appears to be clearly, has a grip on the woman's head, although she's facing the child. What role the child plays, I don't know. This panel shows, I suspect, either a soldier and his dog, whatever role that significance that is, I don't know, but to the right is the wife in the confessional talking to the priest. In on this detail because it's hard to determine what it is. There are some cherubims, or however you pronounce those old guys' name, some birds, those perhaps are funky clouds. And here the main character, whoever that is. Interesting, it appears some attempt was made to clean this off so you could see who it is, but I can't. It was somebody, the imitator. A nice compacted scene looking down the last bit of Charles Bridge at the palace or castle on top. The tower here, and between the towers, St. Nicholas Church. Without tourists. How cool is that? Quaint little side channel, Venice-like, is this. It's an interesting statue. Notice the monk with the leg shackles, and perhaps Christ with the cross, some other artifact, a stag on the left-hand side. There, a Turk with his sword, a dog in the lower right, and the man there on the right with a wrist shackle being held by another monk. And it looks like a dead animal, a deer behind them. Look at the gold arrow stuck in the breast of the stag. An angel who has taken the chains of the men in his hands, or its hands. And look at the looks of anguish on the faces of the people imprisoned here, pleading to God, perhaps in their last moments before execution. The last remains of the exterior artwork on this building. Here, one panel with significant color. Interesting to look at the surface of the tower and realize that it's a plaster that then uses that scratch art. Part of the royal way, which was the route that the king took from the castle across the bridge. Normally absolutely jammed with a flow of tourists going to or from. Guess is that the second upper stories of all of these buildings are perhaps residences. Some, I believe, are embassies. I know there are embassies on this side. Answers that question. Yesterday I looked down this narrow street but didn't go any further, so let's explore this. This is the Church of St. Joseph. This is the Church of St. Thomas. You wonder if these other buildings were around here when they built this, because it certainly has to lose its impact, at least this part of the view, when you have to look at it askance. In this building you see something interesting. I think it's either a sundial or something akin to that. It has very much the look, well, different look, but same idea as the church in Florence. Can you see that rectangular piece of metal that sits out? It creates a shadow that probably parallels those lines that we see going from lower left to upper right. Oh, what the numbers stand for, notice on the top. Those lines that radiate down and spread out at the bottom go from, I think, around 8 or 10 up to 18. And notice what looks to be a date of 1608. Okay, we're going to Vojavny Sady, which is, I think, a park. And we're standing at the intersection of Josefka. I'll turn so you can see the name. Josefka. Tomaska is behind me. And Latenska is where we're going to walk, that goes underneath the bridge. So there's Josefka. And there's Latenska. So we're going to walk through here. Another variation. There are the diagonals, set at diagonals to the street variation of the same. Another. And still another. Oh, you'll recognize where we were a few minutes ago. Coming across the Charles Bridge. There in the background, the National Theater. And this is apparently the little park, but I thought it was much larger. But perhaps it just doesn't reflect all the, obviously doesn't reflect all the buildings. They're a bunch of creativity. I suspect that each person who does this has the option of expressing his art form as he chooses, or she. I'll just pan around. Pretty with the kind of soft haze light. Don't know what that pretty building is over there. We'll focus up to its tower and then to the one beyond it on the hill. Some kind of war monument, dated 1938 to 45. Can't read the plaque, but it's interesting and poignant that someone recently has put a spray of flowers on it. To someone it has a very special personal meaning. Not sure, but those may be the colors of the Czech flag. Walk down that street that comes in from the right there, Letenska, and I'm ultimately going to go up where the Eiffel Tower is, there, dead center in the screen. There's the top of St. Nicholas. And there is the castle. So I want to see if I can find a different route to get back over into that area. That way. Where I'm at the Malostranka metro drop-off, and where we pick up the bus to go on up to the castle. And this makes for a very pretty little park for people to hang out before going on the metro or the bus, or to meet somebody, a tryst. Example of some of the signage that you will see. Metro A is that metro stop to the left. Pražský hrad is the stop, second stop I think, for the castle. Karlov Most is the Charles Bridge. And if you didn't like the modern little park next to the metro stop, right across the street is this pretty little park. I'm right at the corner, right above the M, right where it says Valdsjenska. If you think that's right, good for you. I'm going to go left back to this area over here, and then ultimately up into this area, up into here somewhere. Here on this side street appears to be the ambassador of Belgium. Well, be the Belgium flags. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of the inside of it. This is that all these big walled-in compounds were once the homes of the wealthy, who were, I think the word is, the supplicants of the king. And then they ultimately became government buildings of some sort. Apparently these are the palace entrance into the palace gardens below the palace. Early days, symbols like this, the three swans, identified homes or estates. And then the government at some date made them change, or at least add, numbered systems so it would be easier to locate and tax the properties. If you need a map to get around here, you do in many cities, particularly throughout the world, because here on the same street, it's actually two streets. The accoutrement reminds me of some of the homes in Jackson. Just completed that loop. That's Letenska, is where that cable car is going, and there's Josefska there that I walked through. Another sundial. Let me go way up and top and see if I can see those numbers a little bit. Yeah, 789. I think I'm on Nerudova Street, my pronunciation, and we're looking for great heraldic symbols and beasts. These once elegant homes, they still are. Take a look at these small but perhaps interesting gargoyles for just this relatively small balcony. Looks like somebody stuffed stuff in there. Reproductions of these would sell in Jackson easily. Notice how the tongues are used to channel the water out in a stream.